Hi there, Bobo here again. This episode is brought to you by the number 16. This is the 16th chapter, and it is entitled A Surprise in the Stadium. You might remember that last time Nancy was on the way to Emerson to watch Ned play, and she was being brought there by Ned's parents. And they were looking forward to a really fun football game, and then Ned was going to be in a play after that. And so they were getting ready. They were there. Ned had greeted them, helped get their suitcases together, and they were all settling in for the weekend of football. A surprise in the stadium. The Omega Chi Epsilon house was one of a dozen fraternity buildings facing the west side of the Emerson campus. Every one of the frat houses resembled a beehive. Women and girls were clustered on the verandas, looking through the windows and entering or leaving the building in a constant procession. Nancy felt happy and gay. The excitement of the crowds, the air of anticipation that hung over the college town, wiped from her mind for the time being all the vexations and mysteries back at home. "Here we are," Ned said, leading his little party up a walk to a brick building in a colonial style, from the upper floor windows of which floated three huge banners: the Stars and Stripes, the orange and purple university banner, and a white flag with the Greek letters of the fraternity printed in green. Nancy and Ned's parents followed the young man through the chattering throng to the broad staircase where a helper man, helped relieve Ned of the luggage. "Here's your room, Nancy," Ned said as they reached the second floor. The door was open and Nancy recognized Helen Corning among the people in the room. Now, we've not heard about Helen Corning to this point in time. Greetings and introductions were exchanged. Helen's mother and Buck Rodman's parents were there, as well as Buck himself, a sturdy, curly-haired chap whom Ned identified as assistant manager of the football team and a member of the baseball and basketball teams. So all sorts of new names for us here. Hotel reservations had been made for the parents, and soon the older folks left to be escorted to their quarters by the boys. They were all to meet in an hour for dinner. "Isn't this the most thrilling time you've had in all your life?" Helen demanded when the girls were alone. "Shall we toss to see who uses the mirror first? Which bed would you rather have?" My answer to all three questions is yes," Nancy laughed. Dinner was served in the university dining hall. Beck joined the party there, but Ned, of course, had to eat at the gymnasium with the rest of the football team, whose diet was strictly supervised. Conversation was limited to football exclusively. Buck, again, a fellow we don't know, explained that the game was not only in settlement of ancient rivalries renewed each year, but would determine the championship of the Middle West. So it was about some rivalries between two teams that had played against each other for a long period of time. Out on the coast, Stanford is still unbeaten, and in the East, Yarmouth has won every game. But the one it plays next Saturday with Horning, he explained. "If we win tomorrow, we shall be able to claim being one of the best teams in the country." Ned joined the group after dinner and escorted Nancy and his parents on a tour of inspection. He showed them the recitation halls, the observatory, the university museum. The evening concluded with everyone attending services at the chapel, going to church. Bedtime came all too quickly, but it seemed to Nancy that she had barely touched her head to the pillow before tolling bells awakened her to crisp sunlight and the day of the big game. With Helen, Nancy waited on the steps of the fraternity house for Buck, who was going to escort the girls to the hotel for breakfast. "It's just a perfect day," the girls agreed. "I hope the wind dies down a little." Buck frowned with a professional air. It's blowing at right angles to the field and will spoil the kicking. Nancy did not see Ned until after luncheon, just before the party started for the stadium. He escorted them to the proper entrance and excused himself, for he had to get into uniform for the game. Listen to the final exhortations, the cheering of the coach telling them what to go do. "My goodness, what a crowd," Mrs. Nickerson exclaimed. "The stadium holds 25,000, Mr. Nickerson said, "and I understand all seats were sold out 3 days ago. A special train was run from Chicago to accommodate the crowds from that neighborhood and the east. Even airplanes were bringing spectators from the west and the south. Must be quite a big game." Mr. Nickerson spread rugs on the concrete seats for Nancy and his wife, and Helen and her mother were similarly provided for by Mr. Rodman. Across the field, the State University cheering section was thundering forth its defiance, and the band played with more energy than music. Pennants were waving everywhere. Suddenly, Buck appeared in the aisle. "I had a minute to spare, so I thought I'd see that you were all fixed," he said, squeezing himself between Nancy and Helen. He had brought programs with them for everybody and pointed out Ned's name and number on the scorecard. "You won't recognize him in his pads and helmet from up here," Buck explained, "but you can tell him by his number 32. Our fellows wore purple jerseys with orange numbers." He chatted on about the teams and its methods, and then pointed suddenly to a group in the rows in front and a little to the right of Nancy's party. "That's Clifford Doolittle, the captain of the team," he whispered, pointing to a very tall, red-haired young man, beneath whose overcoat could be seen the trappings of a football player. "That must be his fiancée he is talking with," Buck went on, talking very quietly. "I guess Coach Hart gave him permission to come out, seeing it's the last game he'll ever play here. She's a very wealthy girl from the East. I forget her name exactly." Nancy looked with interest at the captain and his pretty escortee, a girl a few years older than Nancy, exquisitely dressed. The football player seemed reluctant to leave her, but finally turned to go. He had to go play. The young woman evidently thought of something important to tell Doolittle, for she ran after him, calling his name. As she did so, her purse dropped, falling almost at Nancy's feet. When Doolittle finally left, Nancy leaned over and tapped the girl on the shoulder. "Your purse, you dropped it," she said. "Oh, how careless of me, and how good of you," smiled the young woman. "Thank you." Then the thunder of cheers and applause, which rocked the stadium as the teams trotted on the field, made further conversation almost impossible. Everybody was going crazy. A whistle was blown by the white-garbed referee, and the captains of the opposing teams met to confer with the officials. The two 11s lined up. "Emerson receives the kick," Mr. Nickerson said, "but I don't see Ned." Then the ball sailed through the air, descended to the arms of an alert Emerson halfback, and the game was on. Never did two teams seem more evenly matched. The Lions men held like concrete walls, and neither team could gain on rushes. The few forward passes that were attempted were knocked down by alert ends or backs. The first quarter ended with a score 0-0. So this is a big game because the teams are very well matched and nothing's kind of like going on. During the brief intermission between quarters, a young man, evidently past his college years, worked his way across to the young woman whose purse Nancy had restored. "Hello, Marion," he called to her. "What are you doing so far from your family's hijinks?" Nancy heard the girl call back to him. "Don't you think Cliff's biggest game of his career is more important than that?" The man finally edged his way to the young woman's side, and Nancy, without purposely eavesdropping, heard New York and Thanksgiving mentioned before the resumption of the game claimed her full attention. If she is wealthy and from New York, she may know the Hutchisons, flashed through Nancy's mind. I must ask her before we leave. The two teams continued their struggle. Some minutes passed, and then Nancy saw a familiar figure dash from the sidelines and report to the referee. When he turned, she saw a big orange number 32 on his back and knew that Ned had at last got into the game. Just to give the regular quarterback a rest, Ned's father guessed, and correctly. The veteran quarterback was one of the best-known players in the country, and Ned's chances of appearing in the initial lineup were slim until that quarterback graduated. The game took on a new interest to the party now that Ned was in it. Nancy hoped that somehow Ned would streak down the field for a touchdown, but the half ended with both teams still scrapping doggedly in midfield, so they were still back and forth and back and forth. It was a long intermission during which both 11s retired to their dressing rooms, giving the stadiums over to the cheering sections and bands of their respective colleges. Nancy watched with fascination as the uniformed bands marched and counter-marched, playing each other's school songs and anthems out of courtesy and maneuvering to spell out the college initials. Then she remembered the young woman from the east and leaned over to attract her attention. "Please excuse me," Nancy said, "but I was told you were from New York. This may sound silly because I know how many millions of people live in New York, but do you by any chance know a family named Hutchinson?" The young woman looked surprised. Why, that is my name." Nancy could scarcely refrain from exclaiming her surprise, but checked herself. I have a very special reason for asking," Nancy said. "It concerns the welfare of a person who is missing. Are you related to Thomas J. Hutchinson?" The girl looked at Nancy and said, "He is my father." The plot thickens. End of chapter.